Good morning and welcome, everyone. All right. The Ohio Power Siting Board is scheduled for hearing at this time and place case number 21-902-GE-BRO, which is captioned in the matter of the Ohio Power Siting Board's review of Ohio Administrative Code chapters 4906-1, 4906-2, 4906-3, 4906-4, 4906-5, 4906-6, and 4906-7. My name is Michael Williams. Is that better?
Yeah, sorry.
My name is Michael Williams, and I'm the ALJ assigned by the board to preside over today's workshop. Today's workshop is a further step in the rulemaking process regarding whether modifications should occur to the rules at issue. As we begin today's workshop, a bit of history is helpful. The board began the informal evaluation of the rules at issue beginning in March of 2020. The board conducted 3 stakeholder engagement meetings on March the 11th of 2020, March the 12th of 2020, and May the 12th of 2020. To gather information as to what changes to the rules may be beneficial to the public, as well as major utility facilities that operate or seek to operate in the state. In connection with those meetings, the board pledged that it would conduct multiple workshops as it begins the formal rule evaluation process, and today's workshop is in follow-up to that pledge. I'll note that there are 2 additional workshops scheduled. There's a virtual workshop scheduled for this afternoon, another one scheduled for Friday afternoon. I see a hand in the air.
Yes, I'd like to request that you turn up your volume if possible.
Is that helpful? All right, I'll continue to project. There was a request made that I turn the volume up, so hopefully that's helpful. As described in the entry of September the 3rd of 2021 that scheduled today's workshop, the board is interested in comments as to all of the rules described in the case. But there's an emphasis on issues that involve the process for considering certificate applications for electric generation facilities, electric transmission facilities, and gas pipelines, including the potential for implementing a new rule that would be specific to electric generation facilities associated with solar panels. I also note that the scheduling entry at pages 3 and 4 identified 13 topics to assist stakeholders in preparing comments. That list is certainly not intended to be exhaustive, and the board welcomes all comments as to the issues being considered. Now, following today's workshop, board staff will review the comments received and determine recommended changes to the rules. After staff's review, the board will open this case for formal comments to be filed later in this docket. Once the written comment period is concluded, the board will consider the adoption of rule changes or additions within the OAC. I want to stress that today's workshop is your initial opportunity to provide feedback on the consideration of the proposed rules. Also, nothing said today will be considered binding on any of the interested stakeholders. Binding recommendations will be part of the formal written comment proceeding that will follow today's workshop. I would also emphasize that today's workshop is not intended to discuss any case or pending proceeding currently before the board. This workshop is being transcribed by a court reporter from Armstrong and Oakey. If you plan to testify, please speak clearly so that the court reporter can accurately reflect your comments on the record. Also, if you have a prepared statement, it will be helpful to provide a copy of that to the court reporter as well, which you can do by emailing to the OPSB at contactopsb@puco.ohio.gov. Are there any preliminary questions before we begin? All right, I'll invite the first commenter to please approach the microphone there and begin. There's no advanced sign-up sheet, so members should prepare to speak. You're welcome to take your mask off when you're testifying. Can you please state your name and address as you begin your your presentation?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Melissa Thompson, and I'm with Columbia Gas of Ohio. Columbia Gas has 3 comments for consideration at today's workshop. The first affects the entire Ohio Administrative Code section 4906. Specifically, Columbia is proposing that the board staff consider removing the requirement for a utility to provide an alternate route in the standard application. If this requirement were removed and made optional for a utility, the utility would then file an application for its preferred route. If the board declined to accept that preferred route, The utility would then prepare another application for a different route. The second suggestion that the Columbia Gas has for the board staff to consider is adding a definition for adjacent to its rules. Specifically, this is referenced in Ohio Administrative Code 4906-3-09A1 and A2, amongst other places, where the applicant must serve the initial and second notice to each owner of a property crossed and/or adjacent to the preferred and alternate routes for transmission lines. Ideally, adjacent would be limited to a radius around a transmission line or transmission facility, such as 50 feet or 100 feet, or another distance as determined by the board staff. The key is defining how far adjacent landowners are considered in relation to the transmission facility. Finally, Columbia recommends that the board staff consider adding a procedure by which interveners can participate in accelerated applications, specifically to provide interveners the right to file comments in an application. This would fill a gap in the rules where it is unclear as to the participation of interveners in accelerated application process. Thank you for the consideration, and we'll take any additional questions if you have.
Yeah, regarding your last point then, would the intervener participation be limited then to comments?
That is what Columbia is proposing for the board to consider.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Thanks for your appearance today.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Our next commenter, please.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
My name is Terrence O'Donnell with the law firm of Dickinson Wright, and want to provide some comments on behalf of American Clean Power and Merrick Action. Merrick stands for Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition and American Clean Power. As I note in the opening remark here in my testimony, which I will provide a copy of, American Clean Power is the voice of the clean power industry, powering America's future, uniting the power of wind, solar, storage, and transmission companies and their allied industries. Merrick Action is a nonprofit member organization to advance the opportunities for renewable energy development in Ohio and the broader PJM region.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. So the board requested comments, as you noted in your opening, regarding 13 prompts related to the ongoing review of the administrative rules, and Merrick Action and ACP have provided some fairly detailed written remarks, which I will just sort of summarize, but we've tried to address each of the 13 comments from an industry perspective. As a preliminary matter, we urge the board to ensure that Ohio remains an accessible and competitive marketplace for renewable energy. We believe that the existing state regulatory structure and now the addition of Senate Bill 52's upfront local process for the siting of wind and solar projects strikes a balance that should be respected in any new rules that might be put forward, and we do not believe that the board should adopt any new regulatory restrictions that add unnecessary cost and uncertainty to the development process, especially at a time when we're seeing demand for renewable energy from Ohio's employer community reach an all-time high. So that's just sort of a general comment. We get into the specifics here. I'll start with letter I, which I think was the first prompt of the 13 provided by the entry. And this relates to combining applications and rules for transmission facilities and gas pipelines. And the bottom line in our comment here is simply that if the board desires to combine these two administrative code chapters, we would ask that they clearly delineate which requirements are common to both types of applications and which only apply to electric and gas and which only apply to generation facilities. The rules should provide that specificity if the sections are going to be combined. Under item J, what additional information should be included in a proposed project summary? We just note here that often, I don't know that it's necessarily required by the rules, but often many projects voluntarily provide a high-level summary, sort of akin to an executive summary, describing the application for a wind or solar project. We know those applications are extensive, so those executive summaries are meant to be high-level and provide sort of a user-friendly summation of the contents of the application. Requiring this current best practice in the administrative rules could advance particularly Senate Bill 52's goal of increasing public awareness and local involvement with projects. So industry would be open to some sort of codification of that practice. Item K talks about what additional information should be included in project schedules and descriptions. I guess I would just refer to the remarks that we just made in J. With respect to L, what information should an applicant provide in relation to the public interest and necessity of an electric transmission line or gas pipeline? We would say that while this prompt appears to focus on the impact of electric transmission lines and gas pipelines, it's important to note that in applications for wind and solar generation projects, those projects often include short transmission lines. And sometimes that application for that very short transmission line to tie a project to the grid is a part of the generation application. Sometimes it's a separate application. For solar projects, these related transmission lines are typically shorter than 2 miles. There are not many impacted residents. Wind projects similarly include these applications. Sometimes the line might be a little longer than a solar project. Notably, while some applicants for large transmission projects seek these certificates as part of a process to get towards eminent domain, that is not the case for these wind and solar projects. So we understand ensuring meaningful notice is provided to impacted stakeholders is essential to the public outreach process, but would request that if there are going to be changes to the administrative code with respect to the transmission lines generally, that there be an understanding that there is sort of a difference between a large transmission line that might run across the whole state and a very short line that just connects to the grid. Item M, in regard to power siting, what information should an applicant file to support its consideration of public involvement as to the site or route selection process? We know here that developers explain the site process and describe what brought them to a particular location. For future solar and wind projects, Senate Bill 52 helps codify this practice, as developers will now be required to engage with local officials before even filing an application. This often takes place and will take place upon the developer getting some feedback from PJM about the viability of a project in the first place. So accordingly, the rules could invite developers to describe their engagement and communication efforts with community members and elected officials as part of that application process. We know that that local engagement is taking place. So if the rule invited project developers to specify what that engagement has been, that's probably something the industry could work with. We would request that when documenting any such outreach efforts, applicants not be required to provide or disclose personally identifiable information of community members and officials, particularly private sector folks that they may have met with. But our members do make it a priority to do this engagement and can include such information in their application if that is what the rule requests.
Because the list is going to be extensive here.
Yes.
You would ask for redaction or privacy in regard to the developers' communications with public officials?
Potentially. Public officials might be different than private sector officials. I think the way that the prompt read, it sort of was, and there's another question that's related to this. that, talked about consideration of public involvement. So if you're meeting with the county commissioners, that's going to be at a public meeting, it's going to be noticed. I don't know that that would require redaction. You can talk about that. If you're meeting with private individuals who just sort of live nearby a project or have certain role in the community that we want to educate with them, there we would not want to give personally identifiable information about who we've been meeting with.
Okay, thank you.
Item N talks about complaint resolution, pre-construction and pre-operation. Comment there sort of speaks for itself. I'll jump to O, which talks about what information should a wind or solar facility applicant file regarding decommissioning. Here, we note that Senate Bill 52 provides additional clarity regarding decommissioning plans, and the final plan and bond must be approved prior to construction. Wanted to note here, Your Honor, in addition, when reviewing decommissioning plans and the bond that's required to be filed, we believe the rule should recognize that at times, projects will have separate phases, perhaps, and separate performance bonds for different types of facilities. The example we note here would be a project that might be permitted with solar plus storage, so solar plus a battery. And we would like to request that a rule around a project like that would allow the flexibility that if the storage weren't being built at the front end, if the storage were to come later, that the bond wouldn't be posted until that particular facility, the storage facility, was underway or was going to move ahead. So just because the project was permitted for solar plus storage, if you're just going to start building the solar, the bond should just be for decommissioning the solar, not the storage until the developer actually decides to go ahead with that. Item P talks about what information should an applicant file regarding communications with local government contacts. Your Honor, that may go more to your question, and we do talk about personally identifiable information here. Again, if it's in a public forum, public setting, that's probably different. But as a general matter, I think that the industry is certainly open to informing the board about what conversations and contacts it's had at the local level before filing an application. I think Senate Bill 52 kind of pushes in that direction anyway. Item Q, I'll dig in for a moment on what information should an applicant file in support of its compliance with environmental and aviation regulations. Obviously, applicants do a lot of this today. We note here applicants should document and do document coordination efforts with applicable federal and state agencies regarding their project. We note that different project sites and facility types may entail different regulatory compliance features. So it's sort of, it's hard to answer just in a general way what information should be provided. Because it may sort of be on a project by project basis. There may be circumstances that would dictate, different information being provided. But as to environmental impacts, the industry does believe that the rules should make clear that post-operation, if mitigation measures are required, that the rules allow the range of mitigation measures to be considered. As an example, if there are wildlife impacts or other impacts from a project, perhaps avoiding wetland impacts during specific seasons, or limiting clearing during specified dates and times, or monitoring wildlife impact. There's a range of mitigation measures available to projects. And we would ask that curtailment, and this is particularly if you're thinking in a wind context, actually curtailing the project and shutting off wind turbines is sort of a last resort and should be done only when other mitigation measures have proven inadequate. So there's kind of a spectrum of environmental mitigation measures that can be imposed. And we just, as an industry, believe that curtailment is kind of the last resort. We encourage the board to look at intermediate steps that would be taken before curtailment. Also a note here on timing, this is really important. The rules, we believe, should provide flexibility regarding when applicants need to provide certain permits acquired from state and federal agencies for their projects. Current rules provide that certain permits be submitted prior to construction. However, applicants we believe should not be directed to provide all those required permits when submitting the application. So you kind of have different time frames here. You have time of application submission, and then you have time of going to construction. Industry really values and finds important the ability to get certain permits before construction, even if they're not in hand at the time that the applicant files the application itself. Consistent with current practice, we do believe applicants should be able to document coordination with state and federal agencies regarding the status of these permits, again, with the proviso that these permits are provided before any construction will begin.
Yeah, along those lines, I think that the question or the bullet point is intended to get at, is industry able to differentiate what additional measures or more concrete information could be provided consistent with the filing of the application, as opposed to what information would necessarily come in during the development of the more detailed aspects of the project. So I would invite either today or as part of the comment process, some specificity regarding how the application might be further developed or further bolstered in regard to that issue.
Understood. Thank you, Your Honor. On item R, what information should an applicant file in regard to plan management of noxious weeds, irrigation, field drainage, and stormwater runoff? We note applicants ordinarily prepare and file a plan for the management of weeds. The plan can obviously be shared with OPSB. Developers coordinate with stakeholders to assess irrigation systems and field drainage in project areas to be able to develop plans to the extent practical, of course, to avoid impacting these systems, recognizing that most existing drain tile maps may not provide precise GPS locations of drain tile. It's often not possible to completely avoid impacts. With an understanding of potential impacts to these systems and in collaboration with landowners, developers can formulate mitigation plans to avoid, reroute, replace, and repair tile as needed. That happens today. And of course, maps and associated plans could certainly be provided to OPSB. In addition, a designated expert can address items like stormwater runoff and impact on neighboring parcels in the form of a report or analysis that could also be provided. Similar response on item S about communication systems. Item T notes here the board is considering implementing a rule to address solar facilities, including setbacks, landscape, lighting design, fencing, and operational noise. On this question, we sort of note here that we stand ready to engage with the board and other stakeholders regarding any such new rule. These topics raise profound policy questions, some of which were discussed during the legislative deliberations during Senate Bill 52. And the industry, ACP, and Merrick would urge caution and close industry collaboration as the board contemplates imposing administrative rules on these topics that could have major implications for the viability of large-scale solar energy in Ohio. So happy to discuss those in more detail, but this rule would be, very, very important to the solar industry as it does implicate, potentially even their ability to do business in Ohio. And then the last item here is U talks about the board and its fee procedures, and I think the only note we made here is we look forward to discussing this and maybe understanding some of the implications with the staff. I think there's an openness to revising fee procedures from an fully upfront payment mechanism. We just need to understand how it would work and what potential existing challenges that the rule might be trying to solve.
Thank you for your presentation. And again, I just invite you as we walk away here to really focus on what additional information can be ripened as part of the application process. I know historically there's been an application and a lot of project development during the review of the application process. I know the board is focused on how to get some more of that information on the front end as part of the actual file of the application.
Understood, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're back on the record. We just attended to changing out a battery in the camera. Our next presenter.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Hector Garcia Santana. I am employed by American Electric Power as a senior counsel, and I am appearing here primarily regarding transmission issues related to the request for the workshop. I would like to start by saying that we are generally supportive with the concept of simplifying the rules and making the process more effective and more streamlined, and that's going to be in the interest of Ohio residents, property owners, and businesses seeking to expand or locate their operations in Ohio. I'm taking the opportunity to address the points right now because one of the main points that I would like to emphasize today has to do with the interconnection of independent power producers, which is the presentation that was just indicated. And in that regard, it is absolutely imperative that applications for no interconnection of independent power producers involve the transmission owners that are being interconnected to very early in the process. It would be appropriate make it necessary to notify the system, the transmission owner to which the independent power producer wants to interconnect at the time that the applications to the OPSB are made, so that the utility and the transmission owner can participate in that process, monitor it, make sure that there's a clear understanding of what are the requirements for the interconnection, what are the facilities that are going to be necessary. This is particularly true in a type of interconnection in PJM. It's called option to build, in which the interconnection client, the independent power producer, has the option to build some of the facilities, and they are eventually going to be transferred to the transmission owner, to the utilities. It is very important that there be coordination, and it would be an easy way to resolve that, to make sure that the utilities are notified as part of the commencement of those processes for independent power producers. That being indicated, if I can take it from the top, regarding the question of the combination of the gas rules and the electric transmission rules, we would like to highlight that the matrix for the gas pipelines actually has a better framework than the electric ones as to distances. So for example, projects that are less than 2 miles are construction notches applications, between 2 and 5 miles are letters of notifications, and then greater than 5 miles are full applications. And that would enhance the ability to develop transmission that is required in Ohio if those were to be matched from the gas matrix to the electric matrix. But beyond that, one area in which Ohio is lagging as compared to other jurisdictions is the relative inability to construct ordinary extensions of existing infrastructure, particularly rebuilds that would be routine in other states require significantly more process in order to be cited in Ohio, and that creates additional work for the OPSB and for the transmission owners. Those resources could be better devoted to the projects that need the most attention. For example, greenfield applications on projects that have more significant impacts than the routine ordinary extension ones. So we would encourage, for example, an expansion of what they call the HH rule, the like for like. Right now, the rules are rather restrictive in the way that they are being constructed as to what is a like for like replacement. And with an agent system like what is present in Ohio, that creates a particular problem because new construction, rebuilding of facilities usually uses the state-of-the-art or modern structures instead of structures like the ones that were installed sometimes even 100 years ago. So from that point of view, we encourage a greater use of ordinary extensions in Ohio. Two additional points on this. Currently, there is no standard to provide approval for small amendments to full applications after they have been approved, but before they are constructed. And we suggest that a process similar to the LON or CN, the construction notice or the letter of notification process, be used for that. So that it's easier to update projects as they are getting closer to the time of construction. In general, the applications right now for the Ohio Power Cycling Board require a level of specificity that would be better addressed in terms of construction practicalities that sometimes cannot be known as early as it's necessary for an orderly development of the transmission system. Let me provide an example. It's entirely possible that a project is needed and it's known in the general situation, the general location where it's going to be located. But it's not known what are the specifics of where some particular soil situation it's going to be present until the process for construction is very close to start. By that point, it's very late in the process as to making the application to the OPSB, and that creates quite a bit of pressure in the schedule for projects. So we recommend that the information that be provided to the OPSB be of a broader scope. Like for example, a corridor. This is something that is very common in other states. That would be appropriate to the size of the line and the voltage of the line. So in some cases, 250 feet on each side of the estimated center line is appropriate. Sometimes you need more, sometimes it's not necessary to have as much. But providing this information up front and then letting the transmission developer do the specifics of construction within that corridor would significantly enhance the ability of the transmission developers not only to respond to situations that are found on the ground once the construction is very close to occur, but also to address concerns from the public, property owners, and the community, which right now, because of the restrictions within the rules, the utilities find themselves in a situation in which creating small adjustments to projects has either the potential to delay schedules or increase cost, whereas if there was a corridor, those adjustments could be done much more effectively. In that regard, there is also an observation that there is a 90-day rule for public input right now that AEP suggests that be made significantly more flexible. 90 days, it's a very short period of time for us to be able to collect the type of input that we can address if we are able to engage with the public on a significantly earlier time frame. So we would suggest eliminating that restriction and allowing for those workshops and public interaction and outreach to occur much earlier in the process. AP would note that several of the items in the request for comments refer to providing additional information applications. And the applications in Ohio are actually quite detailed and quite extensive. So from that point of view, we don't believe that additional information would be warranted or useful. If anything, our recommendation is that the information be provided earlier in the development process of projects, which necessarily would require that some details of implementation may not be known at the time. One of those examples would be effects on communications, shortwave radio, and that type of impact, which sometimes are not even known until after the project is in service. So it would not be appropriate for an expansion of information about those types of impacts or requirements prior to the time that they are known, and it would not be appropriate to include them as part of the applications. One last observation on that same type of situation. The question that asked about irrigation systems, field drainage, system mitigation, that again, it's something that on the field requires very specific attention, sometimes varies from property owner to property owner. Even in the same site type of circumstances in the soil, and the activities in the field can vary very significantly in a small space. So it would not be appropriate to make that part of the application process. Those are details that are better left for implementation and construction. So from that point of view, this generally fits into the request that we advance, which is that the rules should be simplified and made more effective, and this would be in the interest of the public. With that, that summarizes our notes, and we'll provide written comments.
Thank you. Just one point of clarification.
Yes, please.
You indicated that Ohio standards are more robust than some of the other standards that AEP encounters. What areas, if you're able to indicate here today, more specifically, would AEP recommend be made less restrictive in order to better align Ohio with other states that AEP works with?
Certainly, Your Honor. There are two that are the most prominent. One is the absence of a corridor in Ohio as to where to do specific centerline construction once projects are already known to be necessary in a particular area, but it is not known at the time of the application where that center line exactly should be. It is a very common practice, and it's a very effective practice to have a corridor, a space within which the utility provides information about the conditions in which the facilities are going to be constructed, but within which the utility, once construction is very close to occur, can make small adjustments, sometimes 10 feet, sometimes 100 feet, in order to be able to respond to conditions on the ground and to requests from the public property owners that may not be known at the time of the application, and that should not delay the general process in the life of a project of when the applications are made to the OPSB. If we have a corridor, the application can be done much earlier, and that would be to the benefit of the public, and it would reduce cost and facilitate responding to requirements for construction, things that, for example, we find in the ground. The second of those would be the treatment of ordinary extensions in Ohio. Just to provide the example of neighboring West Virginia, which is kind of like in middle of the pack of their regulation of transmission siting. There is extensive opportunity for construction of facilities that are routine, and for the rebuilding of facilities that have exhausted their useful life and either need to be upgraded because they no longer satisfy safety requirements or electrical requirements or operational requirements. The transmission system has lasted a very long time, which is to its credit. Some facilities that when they were constructed were expected to last between 45 and 50 years. Some of them are approaching 100 and have served well, but the system is aging, and the rebuilding of those facilities, very often it's going to be in either existing right-of-way or very close to, in parallel to existing right-of-way. The impacts are relatively minimal and routine, and it would be to the great benefit of the public to be able to construct those facilities without having to obtain approval for them, so that the resources of the OPSB and of the utilities for applications can be focused on the projects that require the most attention, which, for example, something that involves greenfield. More permissive, if I may, a more attractive framework, particularly for customers that are seeking to expand or relocate their businesses to the Midwest. In Indiana, the requirements for siting are fairly minimal. It's left to the engineering judgment of the utilities, and the utilities, if I may, take the responsibility very seriously. There is quite a bit of work that is done in connection with outreach and siting that goes beyond what's required in the rules, and this is true not only in Indiana and Ohio, but elsewhere. But by the same token, having the flexibility to construct ordinary extensions of existing systems would significantly alleviate and simplify the development of the infrastructure that's required in Ohio.
Thank you very much. The board would certainly welcome detailed comments regarding the impact and how that might be mitigated, as well as regarding the comparative treatment in other states that might be useful in terms of consideration of those modifications. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Honor.
We're back on the record.
Good morning, Judge.
Good morning, welcome.
My name is Devin Flayhive. I'm with the law firm Porter, Wright, Morrison, Arthur at 41 South High Street, Suite 2900, Columbus, Ohio 43215. I am counsel for First Energy and American Transmission Systems Incorporated, which I may refer to as ATSI. Understanding that there is a collateral backdrop relative to the board's transmission report to the General Assembly, my remarks this morning on behalf of ATSI are confined to the existing rules and our input on suggestions with respect to just the rules review portion. So I'll keep it confined subject-wise. Moving on to the concepts we'd like to raise this morning. To echo Mr. Garcia Santana's remarks on behalf of AEP, ATSI proposes certificating a transmission corridor as opposed to the center line. Benefits would include diminishing instances where amendments would have to be filed, particularly when route adjustments are for the purpose of accommodating requests of property owners. And so ATSI would already presumably have acquired the right-of-way needed to make the adjustment. Dovetailing from that is another more or less streamlining suggestion for the siting approval process with respect to an accommodation for normal course extensions and maintenance. Some examples would be ordinary course switch replacements, which may, just due to the specifications of the technology, require a taller pole, as well as replacing a limited number of poles from wood to steel or vice versa, or perhaps poles that are particularly damaged by woodpeckers, that sort of thing. If there would be a way to kind of carve out a category for those types of projects, that would circumvent even an accelerated application process to further reduce cost to the utility for regulatory compliance. As Mr. Garcia Santana also alluded to, thank you, there are coordination and timing challenges for the new generation interconnection transmission facilities, because there's no really right or wrong way necessarily to package those approvals. Sometimes the generation is cited separately from, say, the switch yard, the line loop, and the gen tie. Sometimes they're all in one package. And as Mr. Garcia Santana also alluded to, it's important for the utility to stay apprised of the project's approval process, like before the board, in the event that there's not a joint filing. So generally, what we've discussed is, in the event that there's not a joint filing for the transmission portion, perhaps adding a certification requirement about the coordination between the project company and the utility for the construction and completion of those facilities needed to tie the generation facility into the grid. More granularly, as far as some clarification for the application requirements.
Well, if I can just go back to that last point.
Absolutely.
I'm going to lose this in my notes. I understand the request for better coordination between the project and the utility, the transmission line owner. Is that something that needs to be addressed in rule, or is that something that can be addressed in certificate conditions or otherwise by the board?
I would say at this point it's ambiguous as far as whether the board contemplates a joint filing for the transmission facilities portion of the project, and to the extent there would be a way to clarify that process or even carve out an exemption for transmission facilities that meet that limited scope in terms of, just gen tie, switch yard, line loop to the grid, in order to better facilitate, given all the different, schedules that are at issue, compliance, from the utility and the project company side as far as their documentation and agreements with PJM. So to the extent an exemption would be entertained, that might be another possible route.
Okay, thank you.
As far as the filing requirements themselves, as he suggests having more clarification about the distinction between required studies for the alternate route as opposed to the preferred route. Customarily, given the invasiveness of, for example, phase 1 archaeological surveys, the practice has been to confine those types of boots on the ground reviews to just the preferred route. To the extent the rules could clarify specifically what desktop studies would be required for the alternate route, just so we're not in a position to surmise, that may be helpful. Additionally, along the same lines, the construction start date piece of it is tough because, again, with scheduling coordination, perhaps there could be a specific window for the construction start date. If we say, year and quarter, specify that in the rules, so ATSI doesn't feel concerned that we need to file a construction start notice given perhaps a slight deviation from what was included in the application itself. ATSI does also support AEP's suggestion of aligning the matrix requirements more closely between electric power transmission lines and gas pipelines in terms of length, understanding that obviously the above ground power lines are quite different from an underground gas pipeline. There still might be a way to merge the analyses more than they are right now for the different categories of projects. In closing, ATSI appreciates the opportunity to provide this input and supports a rule review process that remains core to the statutory requirements of the power siting boards rules as they exist today.
Thank you, Ms. Floyd. I have the same comment I gave to Mr. Garcia Santana, which is the more detail we can provide relative to the current encumbrances and how other states might be treating the issues would certainly be beneficial for board's consideration.
Absolutely, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Your Honor, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this workshop. My name is Mike Pullins from Champaign County. I'm here today as a landowner, a farmer, and a community member. My wife Kathy, my sons Matt and Ken, own 1,500 acres. All of that was purchased except 75 acres were inherited. And also I'm retired from the Ohio Farm Bureau after a 33-year career. Together with my wife and sons, we represent a combined 140 years of farming experience. I wish to share some of my background and our farming operation to legitimize my comments today. We are participants in the Clearview Solar Project in Champaign County. I was also a landowner and participant in the Buckeye Wind Project, one of the very first renewable energy projects in Ohio, and therefore have had 10 years and more of experience interacting with the Power Siting Board, and it's been a good experience. I'm also president of a financial services firm that focuses on the ag community. I have a BS in ag, a master's degree in business. My wife has a master's in education and 35 years experience. My one son has a master's in engineering and works for General Electric Aviation. My other son has a master's in business, is a certified public accountant, and is an executive for one of the 5 largest banks in the United States. I share this and acknowledge that our farm family is not typical. But on the other hand, we're not solely unique. Farmers and farm communities have a lot of training, resources, experience to make decisions about the most important asset that they have, and that's their land, which is their retirement. May have been built over many generations, and whatever the rules and process here should not interfere with the ability of a farmer to make a decision in the best interest of their business and of their farmland. I'd like to compliment Power Siting Board, and again from my experience, on their past professionalism and avoidance of the political issues that surround this whole thing. I compliment the staff and you on your ability to understand and focus on the technical issues that do impact these projects, and to dismiss the outrageous claims and accusations by the uninformed and politically motivated that travel the circuit and internet presenting fear-mongering misinformation without accountability. I'm reminded of a recent misguided testimony and one that I participated in that said that solar projects generate heat, raising the temperature in the local community. Totally outrageous and false. I implore the Power Siting Board to maintain your objectivity and continue to focus on the real issues while requiring a level of information that reflects the real impact to the community and the grid. A requirement, therefore, should be clear and differentiate the specific project, i.e. the risk and level of risk are quite different between wind, solar, transmission, pipelines, and so on. Even project to project within solar can be very, very different, and the flexibility needed to address that. It's important that these rules remain reasonable and are balanced and do not conflict with Senate Bill 52. If the legislature, at numerous stakeholder meetings, one-on-one, I personally testified as part of that activity, decided not to make statutory changes to things such as setbacks and landscaping, then I believe no changes in these areas are required and our current process should stand. There is recognition and understanding the Power Siting Board has a robust process in place to meet the individual needs of the project and the community. Solar projects are in many different counties, different topography, soil, population density. There is not, even within solar, a one-size-fits-all for siting utility-scale solar projects. The real point is differentiation solar is that it is a temporary facility. While yes, it's 35 to 50 years, it leaves the land at the end of the project even better condition. The soil tilth, the productivity is better than when the solar project started. And therefore, some of the requirements need to reflect that temporary situation. We have a robust process now, takes a year, sometimes with Buckeye Wind, maybe 8 or 10 years. With public input, dozens of studies, and thoughtful design. Solar should not have more stringent permitting process than other sources of energy. Even development on the farm. For example, the permit process for siting a livestock operation. There's a process similar, probably not as robust as siting. And again, that livestock facility would be a temporary facility. It's important to have landowners and farmers maintain control of their land. Their land is their primary retirement estate planning tool. Farmers are unique in this regard. I share with you some comments on the Conservation Reserve Program. The USDA has a program where they pay farmers to set aside for a longer term, 10, 15, or more years, land for grassland establishment and development. In the US, that's 25 million acres. In Ohio, it's about 300,000 acres. In my own county, it's nearly 4,000 acres that is taken out of production and put into grassland to benefit the community and our nation in total. The USDA, and I have some land enrolled and just re-enrolled some of my land in the CRP, pays $200 per acre or more per year to enroll this land and protect it. On the other hand, we accomplish essentially the same thing with a solar facility, taking 1,000 acres and putting it into grassland where the taxpayer doesn't have to pay. In fact, the taxpayer receives revenue from the project. And so if it's a good thing for the USDA to pay farmers, it's certainly a good thing for the community where they receive a return. Specifically, I'd like to address some of the rules and process. In some cases, for example, the Clearview project, I think that some of the archaeological requirements are excessive and not in line with the risks.
I'm going to just stop very briefly here, Santana. It's imperative that we not discuss specifics of any case. I understand your account is based on your familiarity with a project, but I want to back away from referencing specific cases.
I understand that, and my comments are certainly applicable to the broader issues here for solar cases and projects in Ohio. And the point being, that is one area where solar projects and the siting, the topography, etc., are unique. And the archaeological requirements should reflect that. Where it is at the top of a watershed, where there are no streams, our native inhabitants over thousands of years mainly live near streams. And so where you don't find, and projects are that are not near streams, there's much less risk of an issue. Also, the actual impact on any archaeological, other than a substation or something like that, where a solar project is driving posts and those posts are removed, the impact on any archaeological site is minimal. And I'm not saying that there should be no archaeological, but it should be at a level that's indicated by the risk of the topography. And much of that is known today where there were native settlements and so on. And those cases certainly should be taken care of. Screening, while appropriate, need not be excessive. One comment said that screening should enhance the area. Well, I'm not sure what that means. That's a personal term and a judgment. Certainly in relation to the normal cropping landscape and view shed, that can be very different. And while it may be representative of that region, and that 200 years ago, it's not representative today. And so I think there needs to be some more flexibility in the screening area. The one area that I think needs more attention is drainage. And one of our other people today mentioned drainage. And my family also has been in the farm drainage business for 75 years. My father started a business, my brother and nephews operate that in the area in Champaign County and for 100 to 200 miles surrounding that. And the point being that there too, a solar project is unique. Once constructed, it is very difficult to install or even repair existing drainage. So it needs to have more focus up front by the developer, by the landowners too, who are very concerned about drainage and the productivity of their soil. The important thing that I don't think communities understand, or the Power Siting Board, is that the real risk on the drainage issue to neighbors is upstream, not downstream. It's upstream, where a tile that's draining an area upstream from the solar project, if that is damaged, it will cause water accumulation, poor drainage, and lots of issues upstream. Solar projects with a grassland base will increase water infiltration in the project area. It actually reduces storm runoff into the areas and communities downstream. And so the focus needs to be upstream, not downstream. And it benefits those people who are downstream with this, and the grassland will infiltrate much faster than in the spring a field out there that just got planted, was tilled up, the soil's loose, and so on. That's when you get storm runoff, and not when you have grass. That's the whole purpose of the Conservation Reserve Program, is to reduce storm runoff, filtration areas, and so on. So drainage expertise and input is important there to the Power Siting Board rules and regulations. With that, I would conclude my remarks, and I appreciate the opportunity from others, but if you have further questions and so on, would be very pleased to share my thoughts or detail with the staff at Power Siting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foltz. Just to clarify, it sounded as though a fair bit of your comments were aimed at protecting the status quo of the rules as they exist. You did spend some time talking about drainage concerns and considerations. Are there rule deficits that you see that would better address those, or is it more a matter of the way the board approaches its review process?
I think it's more the way they approach the review process. I'm not sure that All projects evaluate the drainage impacts. Drainage is hidden. And yes, there are difficulties in identifying what drainage is already there, avoiding it, avoiding damage to the underground drainage, but that needs to be done. I would suggest it's much more of an important issue than the archaeological that's not going to change there, especially in ground that's been tilled and farmed for 200 years. We're not going to change the 12-inch profile there, top profile there, and whatever's there is going to be there when the project's over. It's temporary. But drainage, if you damage tile, it can impact all of the tile upstream and damage that, so that at the end of the project, it all has to be replaced. And perhaps some more expertise and understanding in the drainage area would be helpful to the process.
Thank you very much. We're back on the record. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to participate in the Ohio Power Siting Board Review Workshop. My name is Jane Sweet, and my brother and I are fourth-generation farm owners in Greene County. And I thought it was important to share the interests of a long-term landowner, because utility-scale solar does not happen without willing landowners. And for most farm families, our land is our source of our livelihood and of our debt. And when you talk to many farmers about stock investment, they usually speak in terms of Holstein and Jersey, Hereford beef, your cows, your lambs, your chickens. But we also have other investments. And it's a very important note, solar project participants retain ownership of the land. And my family and I are working with Kingwood Solar in Greene County and have committed part of our land to the project. This was a family decision, and we are proud to be able to use our land to generate clean energy. Many believe that solar is a crop of the future and one of the many paths for farmers for diversification. And Ohio State Extension research shows the steady decline in Western Ohio cropland and cash rent values. Solar farms on privately owned land is one way to preserve our farms, maintain production, and increase value for future generations. Right now, farmers need to think differently and plan for changes in our industry. Adapting to the innovation that fuels our economy is key. Today's agriculture requires crop diversification, sustainable farming practices, and forward-thinking ideas. The sustainable practice of allowing the land to lie fallow is a regenerative technique. The solar farm will provide a pollinator habitat planting within the arrays and reduce carbon emissions. And by allowing the soil to lie fallow, rainwater runoff will filter into our aquifer with greatly reduced amounts of fertilizer, herbicides, and pesticides, all goals of the H2O Ohio Water Initiative. The solar array infrastructure has an eye on the future of energy. The arrays can be removed and recycled, returning land to agricultural production in the future. The solar lease company is committed to restoring the land at the end of the project at its expense. And we believe this project is preferable to selling our land for permanent, non-agricultural use. Septic systems and parking lots are not easily recycled. Solar power is low-lying, emission-free, and once construction is done, it makes a quiet neighbor. I know community members voice concerns, and I want to address this from my perspective. In the last 20 years, since 2001, in the townships surrounding the proposed solar project, a large number of farms have changed hands. death and taxes caused farm owners to sell off individual building lots, entire farms, or farm parcels through auction, land developer, or privately. Now, acres of houses stand where crops once grew. And I didn't have any say in what my neighbors did, and I trusted that they would develop their land in a way that was right for their family and our community. I also want to correct a frequent misstatement about Kingwood's solar power usage.
Again, I'm going to just stop for just a minute there. I know Kingwood is a case pending before the board.
Okay.
So I'd ask that you keep your comments independent of cases that are pending before the board, please.
Okay. But our neighbors are saying things that the power usage would be going to the East Coast, whereas in fact, the actual electricity generated would be consumed in and around our county by those serviced by the incumbent utility and other utilities connected to the transmission system. I also participated in the Senate Bill 52 hearings, both in the House and Senate. The legislature listened to solar advocates and those opposed to solar development. The bill added significant changes to how solar is developed in Ohio. And that said, with the significant debate and consideration put forth, I am concerned about now adding requirements to solar siting that were not agreed to by the legislature, the governor, or the stakeholders. For instance, Senate Bill 52 discussed setbacks, and the legislature passed the bill with no setbacks included. I would hope that we would be able to respect the compromise reached in Senate Bill 52 and the legislative intent to not include arbitrarily prescribed setbacks. While they may be necessary for these projects and are routinely delineated through stipulations, the OPSB should provide flexibility on a parcel-by-parcel basis that allows participating and non-participating landowners to establish reasonable setbacks where needed. Vegetative screening plans can help with viewshed and other concerns as well. And it was the intent of the legislature to grandfather in projects new requirements to projects that are far into the siting process would be in conflict with the Senate Bill 52 agreement. And the solar company that I am working with has hosted community meetings, has a website, Facebook page, and has made their team available to the community. We will begin installing natural screening, pollinator habits, and many other features that go above and beyond industry standards. Our solar project has character. It's not a regular rectangular block of unsightly panels. It curves along the farm roads and through the woods. And there are many pathways and open spaces for the deer and other wildlife to roam without restriction or interference. It could be a showpiece for a future tour destination to demonstrate how technology and advanced structures and nature can work together in harmony. This clean solar energy project will add $1.5 million to our local schools and governments annually, benefiting local families, schools, townships, and the county. It will also provide a stable source of revenue for years to come by creating many construction jobs and other long-term employment opportunities. The next generation of farmers should have opportunities, not obstacles. And I thank you for this opportunity to participate in this workshop.
Ms. Sweet, thank you. Same question, or line of question I asked Mr. Pullins. My sense is that you're in favor of status quo in regard to the board's consideration of the rules. Is that an accurate representation?
Yes.
And were there any rules that you feel are overly prescriptive that you would feel should be revisited in regard to possibly paring back?
I guess one thing I am concerned about are changes that are proposed that could be made that would affect the project that are probably not reasonable or necessary to have. I am concerned about having higher standards than something like fracking. You know, I think there is not a lot of oversight about what fracking can do to our water source. I'm very concerned about our aquifers and what all we do in protecting our land.
But nothing specific in terms of the rule, you would see a rule that needs to be pared back.
At this time, no.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to come forward and provide comments? Okay, I don't see anybody else who wants to present today. So in closing, I do want to emphasize the board appreciates everyone who took the time to attend today and to present, as well as those who are watching virtually. The board's consideration of these rules is a large undertaking. It impacts many stakeholders. The board values the input that it receives in this pursuit. As for next steps, I'll remind everyone, the board will open up this case for further formal comments pursuant to an upcoming entry. Please continue to follow this case on the docket, case 21-902-GE-BRO. And that will, when the entry is published, everybody's comments, you'll find it there. We certainly encourage, the board would encourage the public to participate through the consideration of the comment phase of this case. And with that, this concludes this morning's workshop. We will adjourn this morning and we'll convene virtually again this afternoon and Friday morning as well. Thank you.